Hi, I'm Arun Sundarajan. Welcome to Tech at Stern. I'm here today with Kathleen DeRose, one of the directors of our newly formed Fubon Center and one of the world's experts on fintech. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thanks so much.
Tell us a little bit more about what you do at Stern.
So I'm a finance professor here at Stern, and my mission is to make Stern the #1 institution known for fintech. And that really encompasses three different things: having a winning curriculum, being a thought leader in fintech research, and building the most effective fintech ecosystem here in New York.
What exactly is this? I hear the term a lot, but there are people who tell me, I don't understand what fintech is. Isn't everything in finance about technology? So how do you really draw the boundaries around it? So how would you define the subject that you are one of the world's experts in?
My favorite topic, I like to quote Robert Merton, famous economist. He said, look, from Babylonian times, we've had the same 5 financial functions in any functioning society. It's payments, money transfers, insurance, markets, and capital allocation. And his key insight was those functions don't have to happen inside any particular institution, that you can decouple the two.
Okay.
So the world of fintech is really about taking what has historically been intermediaries or toll takers and replacing them with software, APIs, mobile networks. So I like to think of fintech as the easy pass of finance. That really opens up all kinds of exciting opportunities to lower cost, make things more transparent, make financial services more accessible, and even further, some really cool ideas about what is the meaning of money and things like that.
So the way you describe it, it sounds like large-scale disintermediation using digital technologies. Is that a reasonable projection, or do you see the intermediaries as remaining and vetting the technologies within their existing systems?
Yeah, no, I think that's the open question, right? So historically, financial services has been pretty good at adopting technology like many other industries. However, along the way, those costs of intermediation have never really fallen. In fact, for like 100 years, they've been stuck at around a 2% level.
Yeah,
So-
or with IPOs, 7%.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. In some cases, as you point out, a lot higher than that, right? I think there's still plenty of room for substantial improvement in that cost.
So ever since I've been at Stern, there's been an interest of how is technology changing finance. And the financial services industry has, in fact, been one of the pioneers in the adoption of digital tech, from ATMs in the 70s to the digitization of exchanges in the 90s. Why do you think there's been such a heightened interest in fintech over the last few years? I mean, is it blockchain and crypto? Is it artificial intelligence? Is it robo-advisors? I mean, what's driving the heightened interest in fintech?
This is a question of sort of why now? And I think a couple things converged around the time of the financial crisis. So first of all, that crisis itself, created some dissatisfaction with kind of the traditional way of doing things. Meanwhile, technology trends that have been well established, like adoption of mobile technology and access to cheap, open source software, have also converged, enabling for the first time startups to start to really invent new ways of doing financial services.
Yeah.
I think we are at a kind of a critical point. You take a typical bank, something like 90% of the tech budget goes to regulatory compliance and kind of maintaining old legacy systems. So that really leaves little room for innovation and a lot of room for upstarts to try to catch hold.
That's fascinating. And so a lot of the innovation is being driven not within the budgets of the large banks, but from the billions of dollars that are flowing into companies like Alipay.
This is a great point you bring up as well, that there's substantial capital that's helping support the growth in these new businesses attacking kind of the old incumbents.
Stern has always been one of the pioneers in fintech. We were the first business school to introduce a fintech major. What should a student expect from a fintech major?
We'd like students to walk away from our kind of foundational courses with some fluency in the basic technologies and to be able to consume them. So maybe less likely to be a producer since we're a business school, but to consume those technologies effectively. And secondly, to have a good understanding of the workings of the financial system so they understand how to help an incumbent adapt or launch an upstart fintech startup. The last thing I think is really important in this age is fintech citizenship, meaning really understanding the implications of some of the technology, both good and bad, and being prepared to kind of help lead that into the future.
We train our students to sort of have some technological expertise. Some of them do come in as experts, but we train them with the foundations of finance, but we also sort of train them at the interface.
So that's what's changing. So you could almost think of us as a parallel to what's going on out there in the commercial world, where old silos and tribes are breaking down as we start to integrate, computer science and finance and data science and all this stuff in kind of one place.
Let's say someone has a fintech major from Stern. Are they more likely to go to a large bank? Are they more likely to go to to Amazon, Microsoft, Google, or are they more likely to go and start a new sort of fintech startup?
I think all these things are excellent avenues, and about a third of our MBAs have taken foundational course or more than one course. 20% of our undergrads,
Wow.
and we're also now reaching exec eds. And lastly, we just launched a pilot online program. So literally, we've got people all over the world. Honestly, if I wasn't doing this, I would be the cult leader of a mega church. So
There is still time for that.
oh, that's right. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have
Let's
the
chat
outfit, but-
afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I always thought that if one actually did want to pursue sort of running the cult of a megachurch, that blockchain technology would be a very effective way of making that happen.
Yeah, we have an unbelievably popular blockchain course. And what's interesting and I think representative of what's happening in fintech is just how much the blockchain world has changed. When we started 3 years ago, it was a bit of a crypto bubble.
Yeah.
And today, actually what's really happening is things that were sort of pilot projects a few years ago are actually getting seriously embedded in financial market infrastructure.
Yeah.
So we've got some emergent platforms like R3 Corda. We've got successful projects that are putting exchanges on the blockchain and things like that. So we're quite far advanced now from where we were even just a few years ago.
And so how is this sort of hitting up against regulation? I mean, as these emerging technologies start to sort of challenge the core of finance, I hear a lot about the regulatory innovation in Singapore and in the UK, where they've got these regulatory sandboxes in which people can sort of be regulation free for a few months as they pilot their new ideas. Financial regulation is always a complex topic. There are its advocates, there are its opponents. As you look at it through the lens of fintech innovation in the United States, do you think regulation is holding us back, or do you think it's guiding us down the right path at the right pace?
This is a really interesting question, and there was kind of an attitude that some fintech startups were like these Vikings kind of plundering new terrain in finance and ignoring the rules. And we had a couple examples of that, like maybe Lending Club that skirted some banking rules and got overvalued and was sort of a poster child for regulatory arbitrage. However, I think what's really interesting right now is how much the regulatory stance and also the political and economic systems around the world are influencing how fintech is developing. Take two countries that have essentially state-owned banks, India and China. They've developed completely contrasting approaches to privacy. In the case of India, privacy was challenged by the Aadhaar identification system, but then also the court system finally intervened to kind of curtail the expansion of financial surveillance. And the opposite has happened in China, where there's monolithic tech companies on which most banking is done today, and there's just no consideration of financial surveillance at all. So around the world, things are shaping up really differently. You mentioned the advocate of financial innovation, the UK sandbox, which has been really effective at both protecting consumers, but also helping smart fintechs launch their businesses.
So you think we should bring something like that to the United States?
I think it's a great idea. And the United States is very large and influential, and it's a standard bearer. So I think there's been some rightful concerns among regulators about protecting people from buying, crazy speculative ICOs or initial coin offerings on the one hand. On the other hand, maybe there's some institutional turf wars going on about sort of who gets to regulate some of these really important topics, like who gets to issue currency.
Yeah. So it's sort of that mix of making sure that innovation isn't too unbridled, but also making sure that there isn't regulatory capture and sort of the big players don't block the innovation. Okay.
Yeah, and I think RegTech is emerging as well, not only inside the enterprise where you can surf around and see kind of who's doing what, but also maybe for the regulator itself, that in some instances the technology will give them kind of the godlike view they might want, for example, over an exchange, things like that.
I'm going to ask you to sort of gaze into your crystal ball now. What are 2 or 3 areas in fintech that you feel are somewhat important now, but are going to be huge in the next 5 years?
Yeah,
Where would you place your bets?
I think all crystal balls deserve big caveats, right? So probably we'll look back and say the crystal ball was maybe cloudy. So I think there's 3 things that I would cite as potential areas for truly exciting kind of innovations. So first of all, we're starting to already integrate unstructured data and new methodologies in financial decision making, and that's a pretty exciting field of opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think that will lead to maybe the first true platforms in fintech, meaning somebody will become the Netflix or the Amazon, or the Facebook of fintech. And I expect to see that in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
And that leads kind of to the third prognostication, that it's likely that some kind of traditional business models will be disrupted as kind of old solutions to some of these problems, like old structures and products, are no longer relevant. So I see some disruption ahead as well.
And do you think that sort of first fintech platform will be a completely new entity? Or do you think it'll be Amazon layering something or Facebook layering something? Or could it come from WeChat or Alipay, who seem to be pretty far ahead in terms of the mobile payment systems?
Yeah, I would call Ant Financial the largest fintech platform already today.
Okay.
And in terms of potential rivals to that, you're starting to see them around the world as kind of nascent potential platforms. And one I would mention would be TransferWise, which is now operating globally, essentially, as a currency exchange payment system for retail users. And I think that could reach for platform status, among others.
So you've had a fascinating career, Kathleen. You've started off at Chase. You were an MD at Deutsche Bank. And right before you made the leap to Stern, you headed up global investments at Credit Suisse. What motivated you to actually make the transition to Stern, leaving all those potential millions behind?
So, I love this question. So in your career, were you sort of lucky or smart, right? When I started in asset and wealth management, the Dow was 1,000, and it's 25,000 today. So I guess that answers your question, more lucky maybe.
I've always felt that the smart people realize that they're lucky, and the lucky people think they're smart.
Well, very good. One of the cool things about finance, right, is that it's a way of kind of understanding how the world works with a lot of space for continued kind of curious exploration, because even the best thinkers in finance are, never 100% right?
Yeah.
If they're good, they're like 60% right. What's amazing about academia is that this is actually like an intellectual property factory.
Yeah.
And what better place to be than an intellectual property factory when you're right in the middle of like a paradigm shift in how business is done. So teaching folks that will be going out into the world and influencing the future is, I feel very responsible for helping equip them for this new world. So it's exciting on so many levels.
Do you ever feel the draw to sort of head back to industry? I mean, there are all these startups raising all this money.
Mm-hmm.
You've got deep and unique expertise. Where do you think you're going to be in 5 years?
Oh, well, right now I'm actually super lucky to sit on two technology-first kind of fintechy companies, one quite large public company and a small private one. So that's really satisfying in terms of commercial type of ambitions. And in the meantime, I just absolutely love what I'm doing here at Stern and building our fintech programs. There's so much upside left to that I want to continue. And what happens in 5 years is just always more serendipitous than you think. So
yeah, especially in the tech world, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
So one of the most exciting things happening in fintech at Stern is the annual fintech conference. I know you run this conference as part of your role as a director at the Fubon Center. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a bit more about what's been happening in this conference and where do you see it heading? We're
in year 4 of the FinTech conference, and it's one of the only conferences, certainly in New York and maybe the country, that brings together both academics interested in this topic and industry and investors. So we get all in one room all these experts with totally different views and perspectives on the world. So just to give you an example, we had one startup demo his chatbot for advice for millennials on financial stuff, spending and saving. And as a result of that presentation, he was able to get a pilot concept with one of the companies in the audience that day. So I think that's super exciting. So we catalyzed that kind of connection. So it's a super exciting way to build the fintech ecosystem here at Stern, and it just gets bigger and bigger.
So thank you, Kathleen.
Oh, thanks so much. That was great.